Hello everybody, Tommyruin here, and today I'm going to be going over a Shadow Priest based build I have been running recently in Project Ascension. This build utilises Shadow Priest dots to do devastating damage over time. This build was heavily inspired by a build produced by a guy named Name. Now I'm going to put a disclaimer at the beginning of this one that ultimately it wasn't the build for me. I tried it and I tested it and it just wasn't up my street. I'm not much of a dot user and I wasn't drawn to it as much as other builds I've used. There were a few downsides to the build that meant it didn't really stack up in certain situations, but I'll go over that in more detail later on. So the core premise of the build is to do high damage over time, utilising the Shadow Priest tree as well as the Affliction warlock tree to maximise the damage of your dots. The dots we're using can benefit from haste, and therefore we are taking haste talents so that the damage over time effects shred through enemy hit points. There are two legendary enchants that can work with this build, one being Whispers of the Old Gods and the other being Shadow Visions. The one I'm going to focus on in this video is Shadow Visions, as it is the one I've tested the most, but Whispers of the Old Gods can also be used if you are careful. Shadow Visions enhances the ability of 3 of your spells: Shadow Word Pain, Devouring Plague and Mind Blast. They all have different abilities and different effects from the Shadow Visions legendary random enchant, with Shadow Word Pain cast spreading to 3 other enemies, Devouring Plague having a 50% longer duration, and Mind Blast increasing shadow damage on the target by 5% for a short period of time. You unlock these enhanced abilities by channeling Mind Flay and building up stacks of void fragments. Now, another enchant worth mentioning for this build now is the Pain and Suffering random enchant, which allows your Mind Flay to reapply Shadow Word Pain on the target, meaning that you don't have to spend a GCD recasting it. So the main spells we're going to be using in this build are Vampiric Touch, Shadow Word Pain, Devouring Plague and Mind Flay, along with the occasional cast of Mind Blast if the stars align. The shadow damage synergy from Affliction Warlock and Shadow Priest spells really boosts up the damage of these abilities, and then we also utilise the Succubus and Master Demonologist for the 5% shadow damage and shadow crit chance buff. In the talent tree then, we've got 2 points in Balance of Power to increase our hit, and then 2 points in Gift of the Earth Mother to increase our haste. We have 3 points in Ranged Weapon Specialisation, and then we have picked up Black Arrow. This one is optional but is a great DPS boost if you can manage to fit it into the rotation. In Mage we have taken Arcane Concentration for the clear casting proc, and also to proc Arcane Potency. This procs a lot from our Mind Flay ticks and our dots, so it gives a lot of nice crit. We've also taken Arcane Power and Icy Veins as strong DPS cooldowns that can be macroed. Now onto Priest, where it gets meaty. In Discipline we have taken Focused Power to increase shadow damage by 4%, Enlightenment to increase our spirit and our haste, taking our total haste up to 10%. We also have Shadow Power Infusion, which can be macroed in with Arcane Power for a devastating burst combo. In Shadow Priest then, we have a point in Improved Spirit Tap for the mana regen, 2 points into Improved Shadow Word Pain, Mind Flay, 2 points in Shadow Weaving, Mind Melt and Improved Devouring Plague. We also take Shadow Form, obviously we're a dot build, a Shadow dot build. We have Vampiric Touch and also Twisted Faith. Twisted Faith is really nice as it converts spirit to spell power. It also gives us an increased damage on Mind Flay and Mind Blast and gives mana from Shadow Word Pain. Misery has been taken as it gives a debuff on the target for 3% hit, which is a nice boost to the raid. In Rogue we have picked up Hunger for Blood for the 5% damage increase. This one can also be switched out if you don't want to fit it in, but it is a really easy 5% damage boost. And then in Affliction Warlock, 5 points have been put into Shadow Embrace and 5 points into Master Demonologist for the Succubus buff. For random enchants there are quite a few good ones to look out for. Obviously we need Shadow Visions for the legendary random enchant, then there is Pain and Suffering which we need one of to refresh our Shadow Word Pain and Mind Flay. Twin Disciplines increases the damage of our instant cast shadow spells, and we use Shadow Word Pain and Devouring Plague which are instant casts. Darkness increases our shadow damage, Focused Power can be used to increase the shadow damage we do as well, and then we can fill the rest with a choice of Improved Devouring Plague, Improved Shadow Word Pain, or some form of spell power increase. In this build we're using Spirit to increase our spell power, and spirit as our main stat. So we're going to use Fierce Mind as it's used to convert spirit into spell power. But if you went down the intellect route and altered the build to use intellect, you could use Lunar Guidance, which converts intellect into spell power. I prefer the self-sustaining style that uses spirit. That means it doesn't rely too much on life tap, so I chose spirit. I found this build to be quite expensive in regards to the Mystic Orb cost for the random enchants, so bear that in mind if you're just starting out and you don't have many orbs or random enchants. So yeah, as I previously mentioned, the largest chunk of our stats will be in spirit, as it gives us mana regen and spell power through random enchants and talents. So onto the rotation. Now this is more of a priority system, aiming to keep our damage over time abilities up and then filling in with Mind Flay. When we have 9 stacks of the Mind Flay buff, we cast one of the 3 enhanced abilities. Normally this cast is spent on Devouring Plague to increase its uptime. However, if the duration of Devouring Plague is greater than 10 seconds, normally a Mind Blast can be cast, as you can get to 9 stacks again before Devouring Plague expires. So if Devouring Plague is greater than 10 seconds, I like to cast Mind Blast instead of Devouring Plague. Now if you're in a multi-target situation, you can fit in Shadow Word Pain instead to spread it to other enemies. Now it is worth noting that when you're applying your dots, you want to have as many of your damage percentage increases and your crit percentage increases applied. So you want to have your cooldowns popped and you want to have an Arcane Potency proc, because those will enhance the dots that you do. And this is especially important for Shadow Word Pain, as modifiers like crit and damage percentage roll over when Shadow Word Pain gets reapplied through Mind Flay. Therefore, procs like Arcane Potency, which increase crit by 30%, allow you to get a crit on your Shadow Word Pain, and then that will roll over as you reapply it through Mind Flay. More information on this can be found in a link in the description, so take a read if you're more interested in this. Now if you decide to use Black Arrow, then casting this will be top priority for the damage percentage bonus it gives, as well as maintaining Hunger for Blood if you also decide to take that one. In the description you'll find a link to a set of weak auras I use to help track the uptime of the dots for use in this build. I find it helpful and you might too, so there's that there if you want it. Now when you don't have to think about other mechanics, this single rotation flows quite nicely, with dot timers lining up for nice reapplications. However, it can get messy quite quickly when you have to move and worry about mechanics. Therefore, this can lead to some heavy DPS loss. This is one of the reasons I strayed away from this build, because when it actually comes down to fights with mechanics, you lose a lot of DPS. And also in fights with lots of target swapping, your dots also do not get the time to roll out, with ads dying quicker than your dots tick, so you look crap basically. Your performance on the meters isn't as good as you want it to be. In council fights, this build performs okay, but you spend more time managing dots than you do Mind Flaying, making the build up of Shadow Vision stacks limited, so you don't get to use your Shadow Vision's random enchant. The build also doesn't shine in AoE situations. Flame Strike is added in here to provide some AoE damage, but without any support via talents, it doesn't provide very high damage. Multi-dotting at high ad numbers becomes overwhelming and suboptimal, as you cannot keep dots refreshed cleanly. It is very nice to be able to apply your Shadow Word Pain onto more targets using the Shadow Visions buff, but this is only if you decide to single target an ad using Mind Flay rather than focusing on AoE damage. So you have to choose to use a single target spell in an AoE situation to do a little bit of AoE damage. Another downside of multiple targets is the mana cost. Priest dots are very heavy mana users, therefore casting multiple in a short period of time can shred through your resources. So all in all, there are multiple negative traits to Shadow Dots right now, primarily surrounding the build's performance in fights with multiple small adds or heavy movement. The rotation is extremely fun in patchwork style fights, but sadly does not stack up when it comes to most encounters. If you enjoy the fantasy of being a Shadow Priest, I definitely think you should give this a try. It is solid and will perform, but it's definitely not perfect in a lot of situations and is not up there in the top tier. It is very good for PvP however, and I'll definitely come onto that in a later video. Now before we go, I'd like to give a very quick shout out to a guy named Chargy who gave me a lot of gold to help me test this build, so a big shout out to you. people like you are the reason why I can carry on making these videos, and I'm sorry I can't make them any more frequently. I am very much deep in exam revision time at the moment, but yeah, people like you who help me fund making new builds is definitely a massive help, because I can't do it all by myself. Again, thank you very much for watching, guys. If you have any tips for the build or recommendations, make sure you leave them in the comments. But otherwise, that is all from me for now. Please like, comment and subscribe, and I will see you all very soon. Is it you?